Iraq, Syria, and Israel, taking longer routes around Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Experts say the widening conflict and rising oil prices could push travel costs even higher. Oil prices are set up. Some experts say the price spike may be short-lived unless the conflict escalates further.
So right now there's a Chinese airlift occurring using surprisingly 747s that China Airlines Air China has, and they have 10, maybe up to 40, depends. It's unclear. There's a lot of 747 in the secondhand market, so they're doing an airlift. Gordon Chang has posed several questions. What is going in on these? Is it potentially nuclear warheads? Who knows? I think it's concerning. I think there's any indication of that, frankly, they would get shot down. So I think China is actually between a rock and a hard spot on this situation. They want Iran to remain, the IRGC and the mullahs to remain in control of Iran. They seem to be losing control. The reality is China gets a very significant percentage of its energy imports from Iran illegally, violating U.S. and UN sanctions. Almost 100% of Iranian sales go to China, and it's priced in the renminbi. So Iran is essentially entrapped and has to buy all their consumer product from China directly with that renminbi they earn. So it's a very different situation. The big loser in this will be China if the regime collapses.
Do you think there's any course of action that China might be thinking of? If there is, what do you think they're weighing?
Well, they're going to play this diplomatic game and call it an international situation and try to appear to be the peacemakers. Frankly, that hasn't worked out too well with China. China, about 2 years ago, when the Biden administration was being very unclear as to who their partners were in the world, China had stepped in and said they were going to be the peacemaker between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Well, that essentially went nowhere. So Iran will talk about these China will talk about these grandiose peacemaking skills and abilities. They've offered to do that in Ukraine. It's really come to naught. So they'll kind of fall back and play this globalist game and try to leverage the UN, but their track record on this is not strong.
Okay, if the Iranian regime falls, how would that affect China in that scenario?
Well, China, in the worldwide, there is a world war ongoing. Okay, everybody's saying this might start World War. China declared World War III in 1999 with unrestricted warfare. We haven't realized it until very recently that China's at war with us. Most in the United States have not realized it. China needs these regional proxies or colonies to carry out their worldwide World on Fire campaign. Iran is their proxy for the Middle East. Iran is the proxy of China. Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are the proxy of Iran. October 7th wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for China. So China looks at Iran as their anchor nation in the Middle East. Iran collapses, some other form of government is created. I don't think it's going to be pro-China, I don't think it's going to be pro-China. So that means they've lost their colony. I think they're in a very awkward situation. They didn't see this even 2 or 3 months ago. China didn't see this. So China loses their big proxy. You got to look at North Korea, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, South Africa, even Pakistan as essentially the proxies of China. And this would be a huge loss for China.
Okay, what would be the knock-on effects then? Okay, let's say the Iranian regime falls. What's the next step and the step after that with the context of China?
Well, I don't think the Chinese are very popular inside of Iran. It's a huge footprint. The Iranian people know this and notice it. And I think they're going to be associated with the former mullahs and IRGC. So I don't think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be looked at in a positive light at all by the Iranian population. This is the president. President Trump has made it very clear. This was not about regime change. This was about taking out 3 specific sites. Period. All these other things are beyond the scope of what the United States government has done. So if there's a regime change, that has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with America. That's the Iranian people. And again, I think the Iranian people are longing for a change. They don't like the mullahs, they don't like the IRGC, and they associate China with that. So I just, as opposed to the vacuum the United States created in Iraq during the first and second Gulf Wars, which I was there at both of them, we created a vacuum and did nothing. Iran stepped in because we created a vacuum. So I don't see who would step in with the vacuum created by the disappearance of the current regime in Iran.
Well, all right, John, thank you so much again for coming on this Sunday afternoon.
You bet, Don. Thank you.
And that's all the news for today. Thank you for tuning in. Stay with us for NTD Evening News at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Pacific.
But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? That appeared to be the
Iranian
departure from
people
messaging
don't
from top
run his
officials
ass.
in his administration. Earlier in the day, at a press conference at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. strikes in Iran were not a preamble to overthrow its government.
This mission has not been about regime change. The president authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
Vice President J.D. Vance took a similar line to Hegseth on the question of regime change.
Well, first of all, we don't want to achieve regime change. We want to achieve the end of the Iranian nuclear program, John. That's America's objective, and that's what the president has set us out to do.
U.S. General Dan Kane said Operation Midnight Hammer involved 7 B-2 bombers, which flew for 18 hours from the United States into Iran to launch 75 precision-guided munitions in total on 3 nuclear sites. Tehran has vowed to defend itself. After the U.S. strikes, it traded more volleys of missiles with Israel that wounded scores of people and destroyed buildings in the commercial hub of Tel Aviv. But it has not yet targeted U.S. military bases or choked off oil shipments that pass through its waters. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Sunday no more U.S. strikes were planned unless Iran responded. In an interview on CBS, he said, quote, "We have other targets we can hit, but we achieved our objective. There are no planned military operations right now against Iran unless they mess around."
Threatened to retaliate since the U.S. struck its nuclear facilities, but has yet to take any direct action against the U.S. Iran's UN representative said today it will resolutely neutralize any source of threat. The comments came during an emergency meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Board of Governors. Meanwhile, a bill to suspend Iran's cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog is under consideration. Iranian media report that the country's parliament speaker supports the move, saying cooperation will be suspended until Iran receives objective guarantees of the IAEA's professional conduct. And Iran's supreme leader yesterday sent his foreign minister to Moscow. He's expected to ask President Putin for increased support from Russia. Putin said Russia is ready to help the Iranian people at the start of talks at the Kremlin. And the Kremlin also said Russia deeply regrets and condemns the U.S. strikes on Iran.
Not
The U.S. is on alert after
U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites this weekend. The Department of Homeland Security issued a terrorism advisory Sunday, warning Americans of a heightened threat environment. DHS officials say extremists could be motivated to act if Iran's religious leadership issues a call for violence. Law enforcement agencies in major cities are taking no chances. The New York Police Department told Fox News it has added extra patrols around Jewish and Iranian-linked sites. Washington, D.C. and Miami-Dade are also stepping up visibility around places of worship and diplomatic buildings. Cybersecurity is another front. The Department of Homeland Security warns that low-level attacks by pro-Iran hackers are likely, and the State Department is warning Americans abroad to be cautious. American travelers are being told to expect protests and possible disruptions across the Middle East. Meanwhile, oil markets are on edge as Iran's parliament voted to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Oil prices jumped on the news. Brent crude was up 2% to more than $78.50 a barrel, while U.S. crude also climbed 2% to over $75 a barrel. Iran's decision still needs approval from the country's Supreme Council, but the threat alone is rattling markets and prompting international concern. The narrow waterway, just 20 miles wide at its tightest point, is flanked by Iran, Oman, and the UAE. Iran depends on the strait for its own oil exports, particularly to China, a fact that analysts say may make a full shutdown unlikely. Speaking to Fox News Sunday, State Secretary Marco Rubio called on Beijing, urging them to pressure Iran against shutting the strait.
Well, I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide.
Markets are watching closely. Asian shares fell Monday with South Korean's Kospi and Taiwan's TAIEX both down over 1% at one point. U.S. futures dipped as well. Rubio said closing the strait would hurt other countries worse than the U.S.
It would be, I think, a massive escalation that would merit a response, not just by us, but from others.
U.S. Navy
struck earlier by the initial Israeli strike a couple weeks ago, and more underground buildings are damaged here after the U.S. strike. At the same time, U.S. submarines launched Tomahawk missiles at the nuclear facility in Isfahan. Now, Isfahan is a nuclear technology center. U.S. military officials say that the site suffered damage, severe damage, but a full damage report of all three of these are still being carried out. Now, let's take a look at what was used in the strikes. So, we know that at least 125 U.S. aircraft were used. That includes 7 B-2 bombers over here coming from the U.S. But that doesn't include the group of decoy B-2 bombers that flew in the opposite direction immediately prior to the operation. Now, these stealth bombers were accompanied by dozens of refueling aircraft to keep these bombers airborne during their journey. Now, 4 fighter jets also flew alongside the bombers as protection. Each bomber carried 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, otherwise known as bunker busters. These are the largest non-nuclear bombs in the world, and only the U.S. has them. These bombs weigh about 30,000 pounds each and are used to penetrate deep underground before detonating. They were dropped onto Fordo and Natanz. At the same time, one American submarine in the Arabian Sea launched 14 Tomahawk missiles at the nuclear facility in Isfahan without even surfacing. Now, let's go into some more recent news. So on Sunday, Iran's parliament approved a plan to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow body